Are you tired of being in a relationship? I'm not. Not until I discovered a secret. The first love that my best friend was head over heels for was actually my fiancé. Today, I didn't have much work at the office, so I left early and drove to the mall. Steve showed up half an hour later. I was busy choosing a bubble tea flavor. He popped up out of nowhere and wrapped his arm around my waist. Go with the orange one. I jumped a little. How do you walk so quietly? It's you who was too focused. Do you want one? I ordered an orange juice, then turned to him to ask. I'll just have yours. I pouted and changed my order to a large. The first floor of the mall had cosmetics, skincare, and lots of jewelry stores. Steve and I picked one and went in. Are you looking for any particular type of ring? The salesperson asked. Wedding bands, Steve replied, indicating his phone. I'm stepping out to take a call. I glanced back at him. I was used to him being busy. I had already checked the rings online, so I asked the salesperson to fetch them for me to try on. Unfortunately, my fingers are too small, and none of the rings fitted right. They all looked off. Steve's call dragged on. I tried on a few other styles, but none felt right. Finally, when I put back the first ring, Steve returned. Why'd it take so long? Work stuff, Steve replied, looking serious and a bit tense. I usually don't pry, so I held up my hand for him to see the ring. How does this look? Beautiful, everything looks good on you. But it's too big. We can order the right size, the salesperson whispered to me. I was about to speak when Steve's phone rang again. For the second time, my mood took a nosedive. A few minutes later, I walked out of the store. Steve noticed and seemed surprised. What's wrong? If you're busy, we can come back another day. Maria. I fought to suppress my rising frustration and shook my head. It's fine, I understand. Just then, I heard someone call my name. Maria? I turned. It was Jessica. Jessica is my colleague. She was transferred to our office 6 months ago. Given our similar ages and interests, we quickly became friends. Here for some shopping, too? I asked, smiling. You should have said so sooner. I would have waited for you. You walk so fast, how could I? Jessica replied. I just came by for dinner. Jessica is really pretty, fair-skinned with long hair, and has a beauty mark under one eye. She smiles with such a soft expression. By yourself? Yeah, you know me. I often eat or go to movies alone. Well, not today. I turned to Steve, but noticed he looked indifferent, with a hint of impatience. He must still be stressed about work. Jessica, you met at my birthday party. I hugged Steve's arm. You don't mind her joining us for dinner, right? Up close, I felt Steve's muscles tense and whispered, is it a tough situation? At my question, Steve's expression softened. He pulled me closer, brushing his hand down my face. It's okay. I just might not be able to join you for dinner. I bit my lip, staying silent. He used a comforting tone. Your coworkers here. I feel better leaving you in good company. Have a good meal and a nice time shopping. It's on me. I fell for it, knowing full well how to play along without going overboard. Of course, you're paying. Trying to skip out on it? He chuckled, giving me a quick hug. His lips brushed my ear, making me blush. I pushed him away. Go on, get out of here. Once he left, I turned back, realizing I might have embarrassed myself in front of Jessica. Sorry about that. Steve can't make it, but let's have a fancy dinner and charge it to him. It's all right, Jessica replied with her usual gentle smile. You two seem to be really close. Sure, we've been together for 3 years now. 3 years? So you started dating right after graduation? Yeah, we were going to pick out rings today. Mentioning it brought back my annoyance. Forget it, no need to talk about it. Unexpectedly, Jessica paused. Rings? I looked at her, puzzled. Yeah, why? Her smile stiffened a bit, not as warm as usual, no reason. Just worried if I interrupted anything. I observed her for a moment. Then smiled. It's not you. It's him, always busy. Over dinner, Jessica asked how I met Steve. A mutual friend. I met Steve during a desert road trip organized by a friend. It was supposed to pair off 2 guys and 2 girls, a couple, and us, the singles. My friend hoped it'd be a setup. I was aware but wasn't into it initially. The desert's temperature swings caught me off guard. I wore a dress, got cold, and felt ill by nightfall. The next day I couldn't join the itinerary. Not wanting to hold them back from taking photos, I urged them to leave me behind and lay down. When I woke, Steve was by my side. Awake? He leaned closer, gently checking my forehead. Feeling better? I blinked and shook my head. Being sick can make you feel vulnerable. His presence filled that gap. My earlier reluctance vanished. I started developing feelings for him. It wasn't about chasing each other. Things naturally fell into place. Of course, he was the one to ask me out officially. It was on my birthday. He invited me over for dinner and struggled to make a bland longevity noodle dish. He seemed a bit embarrassed, admitting it was his first attempt at cooking. I was honest, I could tell. He laughed, then looked me in the eye. Suddenly, he pushed my hair behind my ear and said he'd learn to cook better to make me a perfect dish next year. The memories stop here. I chuckled and said, he really means what he says. Now he's actually pretty good at cooking. We live together, and he usually handles the cooking. Occasionally, I'll give it a shot, but I've never had much talent in that area. To this day, he still teases me for being clueless. Jessica fell into thought and sipped her bubbly wine. That's nice. Seeing her expression dim, I asked, are you thinking about your first love again? Jessica flashed a fleeting smile. Yeah. Jessica's first boyfriend was someone she met in college. The summer after her senior year of high school, right after the enrollment notices came in, seniors from the school organized groups for the incoming freshmen from the same area. Before classes started, the seniors suggested a meetup for everyone to get familiar with each other. And that's when Jessica fell head over heels in love with her first love. Unlike me, who tends to overthink everything, she was straightforward and confessed her feelings right after the gathering. You know the saying about how girl chasing boy is like a layer of silk. They were the model couple since the beginning of the school year, enviable to others. They were together for 4 years and even met each other's parents since they lived in the same area. Jessica's first love treated her exceptionally well, to the point where there were no boundaries. So even when they broke up, Jessica remains hung up on him and can't seem to move past that relationship. It seems like something so unforgettable shouldn't have ended in a breakup. But since it's personal, Jessica never told me the reason for their split, and as an outsider, I never dared to pry, thinking she'd share when she was ready. I didn't expect her to open up today. She said, I was the one who ended it. But right after, I regretted it. By then, we had mostly finished eating, and as the soup was served, Jessica began to tell me more about her past with her first love. My parents were always strict, managing everything for me. All I needed to do was follow the plan. Until I met him, I hadn't really dated anyone. Little crushes I might have had before faded once we got together. Initially, my parents weren't thrilled about me dating. They thought campus romance was unreliable. But they changed their minds after meeting him and thought we were a good match. Nodding as I drank my soup, I said, sounds like he's a decent guy. Yeah. Jessica had a reminiscent smile on her face. During those years we dated, he treated me like a princess. Maybe I'd been controlled for too long, so I completely let loose with him. It seemed normal then, but now I realize how unreasonable I was. I had to laugh. You? Unreasonable? Doesn't sound like you at all. I was young. Might sound unbelievable, but during junior year, if he was busy with his internship and couldn't spend time with me, I'd pick fights for no reason. He always indulged me, never once got angry. But I was ungrateful. Once, after an argument, while walking alone, I got angrier, ended up taking off the couple ring he gave me, and hung it on a nearby tree branch. I looked at her in surprise, and then? That night, he came to make up, and when he didn't see the ring, he was furious. I think he suspected something, and seeing him so angry scared me, so I immediately apologized. And guess what he did after hearing me out? He didn't hit you, did he? Jessica laughed and shook her head. No, the next day, he skipped his morning classes, searching every tree on that street for the ring. The weather was freezing, and his hands got frostbitten. That's the kind of thing only young people do. Did he find the ring? He did, but he never gave it back to me. I think that's when he started losing feelings for me. I was genuinely amazed, unsure of how to comfort her. But Jessica only wanted someone to talk to and didn't seem to mind my reaction. She told me that later her family disapproved of them being together. It dragged on for a while, but eventually, they couldn't hold on, and broke up. I expressed my regret verbally, but internally I thought, if parents' disapproval was the final straw, it must have been a gradual erosion from earlier overconfidence and the inability to persist. When I got home in the evening, I found Steve in the study. With his glasses on, he looked both refined and handsome. I walked behind him and leaned on his shoulder. Been busy? Almost done. He squeezed my hand. What did you buy? Nothing, just ate. He frowned. You were out for that long? Talking. You know us women, once we start, we can't stop. He usually just brushes these things off with a smile, but this time he asked, what were you talking about? Now it was my turn to frown. Since when are you into this stuff? Are you asking because you think Jessica's pretty? What are you rambling about? He looked serious. I ask because I'm interested in everything about you. If you don't want to share, that's fine. It was nothing. Jessica was just telling me about her first love. Steve was silent, with the back of his head turned toward me, so I couldn't gauge his expression. I just recalled the conversation with Jessica and recounted it to him without embellishment. I finished with, the guy seemed really good to her. Steve still didn't respond, instead pulling me onto his lap. With his cheek against my neck, he asked, am I not good to you? I teased, would you go looking up and down the street, checking trees for a ring in freezing weather, just for me? Steve paused, then sarcastically said, only a fool does that. Oh my God, you're actually insulting someone. Steve never criticizes others, especially not someone he doesn't know at all. I saw him smirk a little, then his hand slipped under my clothes. Not satisfied, he picked me up bridal style and headed for our room. He said, you've seen me at my worst, haven't you? Because Steve had no restraint, I was dead tired the next day at work. With eyes half shut while making coffee in the break room, I didn't even notice someone coming in. What's wrong? Didn't sleep well? I opened my eyes to see Jessica and sighed, oh, don't even ask. She gave me a slight smile, her gaze dropped, and suddenly her smile was gone. What's wrong? I touched my neck, following her gaze. Nothing. She still showed no expression, just took off her scarf. I noticed the mosquitoes love you. If you don't mind, use mine to cover it up. I paused, understanding what she meant, and blushed instantly. I took her scarf, put it on, and tied a knot. Thanks, I'll return it tomorrow. She smirked, no big deal. Because of this, I turned around and scolded Steve, but he was probably in a meeting and didn't reply. He showed up at my office after work. I got in the car, took off the scarf, and pointed at the mess he made. Look what you've done. Steve touched my neck. He was amused at first, but when he saw the scarf in my hand, he paused for a couple of seconds. When did you get it? He asked. It's not mine, it's Jessica's. I folded the scarf neatly and tucked it into my bag. I have a client to meet today. Thank goodness for her, or it would have been embarrassing. Steve gripped the steering wheel tight, his voice a bit raspy. I'll make it up to you. Make up for what? I'll buy you a few scarves, so you can wear a new one every day and make everyone else jealous. His serious tone made me laugh. Just drive. Steve pinched my cheek and started the car. I sank into the seat, seeing Jessica come out of the office building through the rearview mirror. Looking around, her gaze unknowingly landed on my direction. She just moved back to the city and hadn't bought a car yet. Usually, if I drove, I'd give her a lift if I had nothing else to do. But this time, for some reason, I didn't feel like offering. Steve came to pick me up for dinner at his place. He bought a large apartment last year, and I helped oversee the renovation. Steve's mom is a simple and friendly woman, strict with him but great with me. Once we decided to tie the knot at year-end, I started calling her Mom. Unlike others who worry about in-law relationships, it's unnecessary for us. Steve's mom made my favorite sweet and sour pork just because I was coming over. She even packed some of her pickled cucumbers for me since I mentioned liking them last time. Steve complained she was biased. I grinned proudly, because I'm lovable. He chuckled, not denying it. I also wanted to grab my watch I left there last time. If I remember right, it should be on the nightstand. They never hire a cleaning lady, Steve's mom handles all the cleaning. The place is spotless. Initially, I thought Steve was inconsiderate and even talked to him about it. He explained, my mom's always been like that, can't stay idle. You'll get used to it. Eventually, I understood. Steve's early life wasn't easy. After his dad passed, his mom raised him single-handedly. Now, although not filthy rich, they're financially free, living comfortably. I've always admired Steve for his abilities. In the room, the nightstand only had a humidifier on it. I leaned against the door and called out, Mom, did you put away the watch I left on the nightstand? Oh, I was afraid I'd lose it, so I locked it in the wardrobe. Got it. I found the key in the nightstand, opened the locked drawer inside the wardrobe, and there was my watch. Putting it on, I noticed a small black leather box and my attention was drawn to it. This spot usually held Steve's old watch certificates, which I barely looked at. The leather box seemed too small for a watch. Curious, I opened it. It was a pair of rings. Quite unique, with a vintage feel. The female ring was more delicate, 2 bands intertwined, one encrusted with tiny diamonds. I looked at them for a while and slid one on. Perfect fit. I smiled slowly. I reluctantly put it back after admiring it a bit more. Just as I closed the wardrobe, Steve came into the room. He playfully tapped my nose. What's got you grinning? Just marveling at someone's blunder. Can't even hide a surprise properly. He seemed puzzled but didn't press further. After my little discovery, I was in a great mood for days. Even Jessica noticed. In the bathroom, she asked if something good happened to me. I said, I've been looking for a wedding ring but hadn't found one I liked. But apparently, Steve's already got one ready. I guess he's planning a surprise for Valentine's Day. Then I felt a bit regretful. If I'd known, I wouldn't have peeked. Now the surprise is spoiled. Jessica stayed quiet for a while, then asked, when are you guys getting the license? End of the year. Not too far off then. Yeah. Jessica gave a faint smile, congrats. Thanks. While applying lipstick, I casually asked her, got any plans for Valentine's Day? My family set me up on a blind date. Later at home, I told Steve about it. He was flipping through a magazine and paused for a moment before saying, someone's going on a blind date, you can't exactly stop her, right? It's just a bit of a shame. I can tell she still has feelings for her first love. So what? He didn't look up, still engrossed in the magazine. I threw a pillow at him, straight men like you wouldn't understand. The pillow landed by his feet. Only then did he look at me. So what do you want me to do? Do you know any decent single guys? Maybe we could set up a dinner with Jessica? I giggled and sat on his lap. Wasn't it a mutual friend who introduced us? Steve opened his arms to hug me. You've met all my friends. Who do you think might fit the bill? I dropped a name. He smirked in a mocking way. You think he's suitable? I laughed till I shook. Are you jealous now? He huffed, then got serious. Don't meddle too much in others' business. What if they don't appreciate it? I pouted, signaling I'd listen. Noticed the magazine on the table, paused on an ad with a graceful hand wearing a delicate bracelet. I mumbled, thought you were reading news. But you're just stuck on an ad. Because I was being hugged, it felt like I could sense Steve's breathing skip a beat. He said, I got this for you, do you like it? Leaning against him, I said I didn't. Laughing at his taste, I remembered the surprise he kept hidden. The rings he picked out were pretty stylish. On Valentine's Day, Steve made reservations at my favorite restaurant. Thinking about what he had planned for the day, I got really hyped, spent way too much time picking out clothes, and took an hour doing my usual 5-minute makeup routine. Before heading out the door, I put on a dress. Nude-colored with thin straps, and the pearl necklace Steve gave me for my birthday last week. Standing in front of Steve, hands on hips, I asked, how do I look? He stared at me for a couple of seconds, then fiddled with the straps, asking if I was cold. I knocked his hand away, saying, it's not like I don't have a jacket. The restaurant has heating. I cheekily said, well, there you go. He looked at me, then gave in, whatever makes you happy. Valentine's Day was perfect in every way. If only the box Steve produced had been black leather instead of deep blue velvet, it would have been my favorite day of the year so far. As the deep blue box slid across the table, I suddenly felt dry-mouthed and speechless. I glanced at Steve. In the candlelight, he looked so earnestly happy. He said, open it. Velvet isn't as smooth as leather, and there was a bit of resistance opening it. I should have been happy. But inside was a watch. My throat felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. Why wasn't it a ring? The watch was the one I had my eye on but never splurged for. But when I got it, I wasn't as excited as I thought I'd be. Why a watch? Shouldn't it have been a ring? If that ring wasn't for Valentine's Day, our anniversary is long gone, he wouldn't give it on the 4th of July, right? Would I have to wait until the end of the year when we get our marriage license? The wind on the rooftop was strong. I raised my hand, staring at the watch. The more I looked, the more it gave me a headache. I didn't even notice someone coming up behind me. Jessica handed me a cup of coffee, waving her hand. What are you doing here spacing out instead of going to lunch? Snapping out of it, I took a deep breath, shook my head after looking at her, and asked about her blind date last night. It wasn't great. I can't forget the person, can't start something new without a scratch. She gave a little self-deprecating laugh. I've been thinking lately, what if I'd been a little more persistent? Maybe things wouldn't be like this now. But there's no turning back time in real life. I couldn't help asking, didn't you say your parents were happy with him at first? What changed? Did he do something wrong? Jessica shook her head. He didn't do anything wrong, like I said, my parents always had control over everything in my life, always wanting the best for me. Even when I was an adult, they worried I couldn't take care of myself when I went off to college. They actually bought tickets to accompany me for my freshman year, saying it was a tour but really to make sure I was okay. I was just starting out with my first love, didn't think my parents would tag along, had already planned to go to school together. So, I laid it all out. My parents weren't happy to begin with, but when they saw how well he took care of me, doing everything, even carrying my bags, they accepted him. I felt something was off, hesitant to speak, but Jessica nodded at me, you got it right. They just wanted me to have someone to take care of me throughout college. I was left speechless. They said he was quiet, honest, looked like someone who wouldn't have bad intentions, seemed perfect to take care of me. Jessica's eyes were misty. I'd figured out their plan really early, but was still hopeful. For years in college, who knew what would happen? So you were together for 4 years? I chimed in. Yeah. On and off for 4 years, he always went along with whatever I said. I didn't think my parents would be so realistic, breaking us up right after graduation, even meeting him privately to say hurtful things. Hurtful things? My parents looked down on his family, raised by a single mom who used to be a maid. Somehow they figured it out and insulted him with it. He could handle anything, except insults about his mom. Something flashed through my mind, but it was too quick to grasp. I heard Jessica say, he was really hardworking. He worked so hard to make things work, even had savings before graduating. I knew he was talented, and he'd succeed. But I was used to having him circle around me. When he got busy, I got anxious, wasn't understanding, and picked fights over nothing. Even when my parents said such things, I didn't stand up for him. He probably just wanted me to be on his side back then, to support him a little. I was too weak, didn't stand my ground, full of regrets now. I took a moment to process Jessica's words. As a bystander, and being her colleague and friend, I couldn't judge who was right or wrong here. I just asked, do you guys still talk? She shook her head, then nodded. I couldn't help calling him after splitting up. It was really late, I waited outside his building. But he told me he was at his girlfriend's place. He has a girlfriend now? He got one a year after we broke up. Jessica looked straight at me, unusually clear-eyed, but the other day, he reached out to meet up. I watched her, feeling increasingly strange. Why did he ask you out? Does he still have feelings? Jessica chuckled but didn't tell me what they talked about when they met. She just said, when we broke up, I thought it'd just be a little fight like before. He'd usually come around. I didn't think he'd take it seriously. So did you try to get back together? Yes. Did he agree? No. Why not? That time, we got into a fight again. He said I was just being possessive. I couldn't stand him saying that, and I got really sarcastic. I frowned. Sarcastic? I said, isn't it because you love me? Jessica mimicked the tone back then, full of contempt and smugness. If it were me, I wouldn't be able to stand having my dignity trampled on after being belittled at home, and then by someone I like. As you can imagine, he got angry. Jessica said, her tone suddenly weakened. When he got angry, he was calm. It was the first time I saw him looking at me with cold eyes. He replied, Jessica, you're wrong. I can love someone else too. The whole afternoon, I was out of sorts. Jessica, in her emotional state, took half a day off. I stared at her empty desk, repeatedly chewing over her last words. I know he's just seeing someone else to get back at me. Today, my family no longer has the same attitude towards my love life, so when he asked me out a few days ago, I genuinely wanted to make amends. Then she suddenly stopped and asked me, Maria, what should I do? Her voice got softer. I remembered every word she said. I didn't give her an answer. In the face of her hesitant but, I suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. After work, I sat in my car, not driving home as usual. Zoned out for about half an hour, Steve called me. I picked up the phone and waited for it to go quiet. He called twice, and I just took off my watch, hazily remembering those 2 rings, then dialed Frank. Frank, let's talk. Frank is a mutual friend of Steve and me. He's the one who set us up back then. He runs a quiet bar down a deep alley. I went directly to find him. It wasn't opening time, not many people were there, no music, very quiet. Frank looked behind me, where's Steve? Just me. I put down my bag, grabbed 2 bottles of whiskey from the fridge. Frank sat next to me, hesitantly asking, did you guys fight? No. I glanced at his hand on the phone, don't tip Steve off. He doesn't know I'm here. But I figured Steve would call him soon. I turned off my phone before I came. Frank awkwardly put down his phone. What's going on? Don't scare me like this. Across all Twitter, I'm known for my good temper. With Steve, we've never truly had a heated argument. Minor tiffs, even playful ones, just to add some fun to our relationship. In this relationship, I see myself as knowing when to advance or retreat, never asking about Steve's past, only focusing on our future together. I thought dwelling on that was pointless. But today, I suddenly wondered if I'd been wrong. I said, if you still count me as your friend, you have to tell me honestly everything you know about what I'm about to ask. Riley sat up straight. After a moment, he nodded. When did you meet Steve? You know, we were college mates. How was his social life back in college? Honestly, not great. He rarely joined group activities. So, how did you two get so tight? We were roommates, no way around it. He said he often brought food for you. Riley relaxed, smiled. I'd bring him hot water too, you know? Oh, so he skipped group stuff to hang out with Jessica. How did you know? Riley blurted out. My heart sank completely. The idea that the well-behaved, exemplary Steve would skip important classes to accompany his girlfriend to electives was too vivid, it made me cough. I'd drunk too much, yet remained clear-headed. I sarcastically remarked, this is the guy who, on the day we went ring shopping, chose work over me. Riley is loyal but straightforward, doesn't handle twists and turns well. Getting him to spill is child's play. He slipped up, now sitting beside me like a kid who's done wrong. Before, he kept defending Steve, saying who could tolerate their boyfriend being so infatuated with an ex. Not easy to say. Stop drinking, Steve will be here soon. I eyed him, he knows I found out. You two should sit down and talk. You've been together for so long, and how he's treated you, we've all seen it. You must have too. The past is the past, people should look forward. I shook my head. If he knew how I found out about Steve's past, he wouldn't say that. Jessica coming to me explained everything. Her boldness must be backed by Steve's favor, maybe from back then, maybe now. I don't believe they lost contact. But until today, I was completely in the dark. Even more ridiculous, listening to Jessica recount her and Steve's past, I felt regretful. It's deception. It's like a slap in the face, burning hot. Out of nowhere, I remembered my birthday over a month ago. That day was a weekday, I got caught up with overtime. When everyone left the office, Steve came over to keep me company. He brought tons of food, dinner, snacks, cake, and even candles. That night, just the two of us on the entire floor. I made a wish over the cake. Steve sat across, his face bright in the candlelight. I was moved, motioning for him to come over. As he made his way around the table, I kissed him. But it wasn't home, so I held back, pecked him lightly, hugged him, and rested my chin on his shoulder. Thank you. He gave my ear a light kiss and said, Maria, happy birthday. My name is Maria, and most people just call me Maria. He's the only one who calls me Maria like that. I smiled, but then I noticed Jessica through the glass door. She was holding a cake. It was that day I introduced them to each other. I can't remember their exact expressions or what was going on when they met. I only remember Jessica saying she didn't want to intrude on our time and didn't stay long. Before she left, I offered her some snacks. Steve had bought a ton of those weird flavored candies. Want to try your luck? Steve loves to prank me with them. I never get a normal flavor. You might want to pick the pink one, it seems more normal. Jessica laughed, fiddling with her hair. I used to buy these candies all the time. She picked two with brown wrappers with precision. Those were the bitter ones. I quickly stopped her. Jessica held the candies, her gaze sort of distant, looking at me yet threw me to someone else. She said, this brand? I like the bitter ones. I was startled. I didn't think anyone else would have the same taste as Steve in that regard. Funny, you have the same taste as Steve. Jessica finally looked Steve in the eye. Really? What a coincidence. Steve seemed to say yeah, or maybe he didn't. I don't know why I remember this moment so vividly. I'm not usually someone with a great memory. Could you see the problems back then? And I naively thought they were meeting for the first time and introduced them. Sitting on the bench outside Riley's store, I buried my face in my knees. God knows how silly I looked recommending candies to Jessica. When Steve came to get me, it was dark. He stood silently in front of me, then crouched down when I didn't react. Have you eaten? After a long silence, I looked up. Steve met my gaze, his eyes were deep and dark. Riley must have told him everything. He knew I knew. He didn't show much on his face, but I could tell he was nervous. After a moment, I reached out my hand. Steve, carry me home. He watched me, cautious. Without saying a word, he turned and picked me up. He carried me down the street. Am I heavy? I asked. Not heavy. Everyone says drunk people are the heaviest. How much have you had? I'm not drunk. Lying on his back, I was quiet for a while, then asked, have you ever carried her like this? I'm lazy and hate walking. When I get tired, I always want Steve to carry me. But somehow, I was scared he would do the same for Jessica. Steve stopped, and I heard him swallow hard. Keep walking. He spoke. No. I felt a bit relieved, but what flooded out was bitterness. I guessed as much, she never mentioned it to me. Maria, Steve said after a few steps, Jessica and I ended things 4 years ago. But you were together for 4 years. During those 4 years, you treated her well. Jessica described her past self as spoiled and willful, yet someone was willing to be indulgent. I didn't want to compare, but my mind was full of comparisons. It's over now. I couldn't hold it back. That scarf she mentioned, she said it was a gift from you during college recruiting. Steve stayed silent. That was confirmation enough. No wonder you reacted so strangely when you saw it. I laughed coldly. And those weird candies, do you like them, or does she? They're mine, she never liked them. I felt a sting in my nose, so, she lied about that day. Maria. Steve, I don't like those candies either. I was shaking with sobs, my jaw trembling. Isn't it people who cry a lot get candies to comfort them? We both know this candy doesn't mean what it seems. In the past, Steve indulged Jessica. Now, I'm indulging Steve. I was in tears. Steve paused abruptly and set me down. He wiped my tears, the roughness hurting my face. I turned my head away. When did you two reconnect? We didn't. Steve tried to hold me, but I held him off by the shoulders. His hand froze on my face. Your birthday was the first time I'd seen her since we ended. My nails dug deep into his shoulder. He didn't make a sound of protest. So you rekindled things? How could that be? What did she tell you? Some words aren't true just because she said them. But you did hide things from me, didn't you? If what she says doesn't count, does what you say count? Looking at his face, he seemed so unfamiliar. You say there's nothing going on? Let me ask you this: when you found out she was going on a blind date, did you go find her? He breathed heavily and his grip loosened. I pushed him off with all my strength, gritting my teeth. Steve, you two have made me feel so stupid. That's not what happened. Then why the hell didn't you tell me? Steve eventually hugged me tight despite my struggle. I didn't realize the colleague you always mentioned was Jessica. I wanted to tell you afterward, but after the cake she gave you, you seemed to like her. How could I mention it? So you're telling me this friend I really like now is actually my ex-girlfriend? Or are you saying she's possibly just trying to get close to you, hoping you don't fall for it? Maria, I don't want to lose you. I know you need me to be honest, but I also know you'll fall apart once I lay it all out for you. I don't want you to misunderstand. Hiding it was a dumb move, but that was the only thing I could think of at the time. After the birthday, Steve privately warned Jessica, asking what she was up to. Jessica said she was doing nothing, it was just coincidence and she was just making a friend. She also said I was nice, and it wasn't until she got to know me that she understood why Steve chose to be with me. Steve just told her to stay away from me. She agreed but called Steve several times. Steve didn't pick up and even blocked her. Probably because of that, she got all upset and started throwing around the whole first love thing to mess with me. Just as she wanted, the snowball of lies kept rolling and finally collapsed today. When he showed me his phone, I pushed it away and loudly questioned, "Wouldn't I fall apart if I knew it now?" "I'm sorry," he patted my head like I was a kid. "Sorry, Maria. I don't want to hear you talk about this. I can let go of your past, but I can't take being treated like this. This past month, I've felt like a clown, sympathizing with my fiancé's first love. It's ridiculous." I sat down powerlessly, looking at him. "I mentioned her to you a few times, talking about how her first love went. You had so many chances to tell me. How am I supposed to trust you now? You said she was in the past, but now, you're still affected by her. I wasn't wrong, right?" Steve sighed and half knelt down. "The reason she affects me now is because it involves you. I'm scared you'll overthink or her story will influence you. I just want to be with you properly, and I don't want to deal with anything else. So that's why you hid it?" He lowered his gaze, taking a deep breath and said, "I don't know what else she told you, but to me, that so-called wonderful experience she describes is just a past I really don't want to revisit. I don't even want to bring it up because it represents my stupidity, ignorance, and the lack of self-worth. Jessica was spoiled by her parents, used to being the center and couldn't handle any neglect. During that relationship, I used up all my energy. The so-called love faded during that process. But when you heard she was going on a date, you met up with her." I suddenly recalled that magazine ad, and my heart sank a bit more. "Yes, I met her, but it was just to tell her to stop pestering you. You think I hid it for my own gain? That's absurd. I only have eyes for you now. How could I be double-minded?" Such sweet words. I shook my head. "Steve, don't you see? You shouldn't have met her. You should have been honest with me. This isn't about Jessica, it's a trust issue. You don't trust me anymore?" Steve wiped his face and looked up with slightly red eyes. "Maria, what can I do to make you forgive me?" Seeing him like that, I almost cried too. It's not that I don't trust him. It's more that I don't know who to trust. I lowered my head, seeing my empty wrist. It suddenly hit me, and my fingers shook slightly, feeling a bit weak. "I asked you, on Valentine's Day, why didn't you give me the ring?" Steve looked confused for a moment then tiredly looked at me. "What ring?" For my sake, he once skipped classes on a freezing morning, scouring the city to find me a ring. My body suddenly hurt, inside and out. Steve anxiously asked me what was wrong. I forgot I was squatting, as I moved back, stumbled, and sat on the ground. Seeing my pale face, Steve was too stunned to move closer. I looked at him through blurry eyes. "Steve, let's break up." Back at Steve's apartment, I packed my things, getting ready to leave. Steve didn't let me. He said he'd leave instead. "We're not done talking. You get some rest first, don't overthink it. When you're ready, I'll explain everything." After I suggested breaking up, I stopped talking to him. He's not agreeing to the breakup, looking pretty defeated now. I paused from grabbing clothes and said, "I've heard enough of what I wanted to know. Some things don't need to be questioned to make sense." Initially, I hadn't thought of breaking up. I was just so wronged, wanting to have a big fight to make myself noticed. As for the breakup reason, thinking about it hurts too much. I don't want to talk about it. Figure it out yourself. He'll know eventually. The ridiculous part is I still hold some hope for him, afraid to break it too soon, fearing once it's all said, there'd be nothing left between us. That night, Steve left the apartment, probably headed back to his mom's place. Lying alone in bed, I kept replaying things Jessica said to me. Call it slow or in denial, but she made it obvious near the end. I finally faced the truth. I dreamed all night and was instantly awake the next morning when I heard the door. Steve came in with breakfast. He was still wearing yesterday's clothes. Seeing me, he said, "Why not sleep a little more?" He buys breakfast from the one place in the city, over by the university, quite far from here. I met him when I just graduated and hadn't switched jobs. I loved the shumai from that place. After moving here, sometimes I craved it, and he'd drive to get it. But I didn't want to trouble him, so I rarely asked. I caught the smell of smoke on him. "Where were you all night?" "Didn't go home." "In the car." Looks like he didn't sleep at all. I closed my eyes and sat at the table. "Don't just stand there, eat your breakfast, then shower, rest, or go to work, your call." He opened his eyes wider, finally seeing a bit of light in them. He uncertainly sat down, seeing I wasn't going to talk, and we wordlessly finished breakfast. I wasn't very hungry but forced myself to eat a bit. While Steve was taking a shower, I grabbed the bag I packed last night and left. As soon as I got in the car, he called. I answered. Neither of us spoke at first. Before hanging up, I said, "You don't have to do this. If you ruin your health, nobody wins." I took a couple of days off and drove back to my own place. Luckily, I hadn't rented it out. Otherwise, I wouldn't even have a place to crash right now. It had been a while since I last was there. Everything was covered in dust. Riley called when I was still cleaning up. He apologized right away. "I thought you two were just having a normal fight. Had no idea it was like that." "I'm sorry, Maria. It's not your fault." "Where are you now?" "Did Steve get you to ask?" "He guessed, but he's afraid to come find you. If you leave again, he won't know what to do." Riley said a lot more, but I don't really remember it all. For the next few days, I didn't see Steve. Not just him, I didn't even see Jessica. 5 days passed before I saw Steve again. He was waiting at my door, looking a bit thinner, his jawline more defined with a little stubble. Actually, I knew. He'd been by several times. Though I hadn't seen him, I spotted his car. I glanced at him as I unlocked the door. The hallway was silent except for the sound of keys. When I opened the door, he took my hand. "Maria. What are you doing here? Working overtime again?" I pulled my hand away. I asked why you're here. "That ring, I thought it was lost long ago." For a moment, the air was heavy. My hand felt clammy. So what I saw was really the couple rings Jessica mentioned? Let me explain. He wrapped my hand in his, trying to warm it. The search for the ring back then was more about anger with myself, and being unwilling to let go. After I found it, I didn't give it back to Jessica. I just tossed it in a drawer and forgot about it. If it weren't for you bringing it up, it wouldn't have crossed my mind. You say you just tossed it aside, but I saw something different. My mom kept it. I paused, surprised. She didn't know anything. You know how my mom is, sentimental, can't throw anything away. She probably found it while moving earlier this year and kept it, thinking we had misplaced it. With that, Steve took out an old phone. She mentioned it in a text, but I was in a meeting and didn't think much of it, which caused the misunderstanding. I looked at the phone. On the screen, the date was from that time earlier in the year. His mom found some jewelry while cleaning the old house, kept it for you. Don't lose things, it's wasteful. Steve's reply came nearly 30 minutes later. Got it. I stared at the screen for a long time, but I didn't feel the relief I expected. What Jessica said was a thorn between Steve and me, stabbing deeply. In my mind, two versions of me argued. One urged forgiveness. The other asked, does he really not care like he said? That ring is a reminder of them. If he didn't care, why find it? This time, his silence, was it to give Jessica dignity? I could pretend to not care. But that's not possible. Jessica drew me into their past, making me empathetic to their struggles. Now, every time I see Steve, I wonder, did he ever treat Jessica like this? It's become a nightmare, these thoughts that I can't shake off. I won't get over it anytime soon. I already tossed the ring. And I'll sort things with Jessica soon. She won't bother you again. That's your business. Maria? Steve, we've broken up. There are things that can't be fixed by clearing up misunderstandings. Relationships aren't that simple, and I can't get over this. Steve looked at me for a while, his chest heaving. I understood. I frowned. He let go of my hand. Take care of yourself. The next day was a weekend. I woke up naturally, eyes a bit puffy. I had a tennis club membership and usually went once a week. I thought about skipping, but my coach reminded me I missed last week. So, I went. I found out that day the sparring partner was my coach's nephew, and my regular coach wasn't there due to a sudden commitment. After playing with the new coach, I was drenched. Post-game, he sat beside me. Do you always play this intensely? Not really. You seem fired up today. I was panting, my hands a bit shaky as I failed to open my water bottle. He took it and opened it for me. Thanks. While drinking, I noticed someone approaching. After wiping off the sweat, I saw it was Steve. He was in workout clothes, looking younger than in his usual business attire. He didn't say anything, but the coach asked, "Do you know him?" I glanced at Steve, puzzled by his intentions. Didn't he say yesterday he understood? Why is he here now? Just as I was about to shake my head, he cut in, "I'm her boyfriend." Ex-boyfriend. I corrected him, glaring. The coach, picking up on the vibe, wisely said, "I'll go take a walk, be back later." Once he left, Steve sat down next to me. Is that a new coach or someone who came over to flirt? What do you want? Your old coach not here? I got up to leave. He quickly grabbed my arm. How about a match? Why should I? Afraid? Steve, can you stop being so childish? He ignored me, glancing at the coach who was chatting with another trainee. How about a doubles match? I stared deeply at him. After a while, I said, fine. Steve's skills on the court are on par with the coach's. He didn't hold back during our match, and even with the coach analyzing his every move beside him, I struggled to keep up. I wasn't sure if I should be mad at his lack of restraint or amused by his blatant jealousy. In the end, my frustration grew, and I retaliated with full force until he suddenly surrendered. The lime-colored ball hit him square in the chest, and he fell to the ground. I rushed over, asking, "Are you okay?" He grimaced, holding his chest, and asked me, "Feel any better now?" I shoved him away. Are you serious? He just looked at me, pain in his eyes. That night, my phone buzzed with a new notification from my special attention list. I absent-mindedly tapped it. It was a cryptic post from Steve, "Until you're no longer mad." I nervously picked at my nails, unfollowed him, and blocked his number. But he didn't stop there. I posted about wanting sushi, and 2 hours later, a restaurant notorious for not delivering had sushi at my door. So, I stopped posting about my desires online. I don't keep track of my menstrual cycle and am often caught off guard by cramps. Steve somehow anticipated it, sending medication with a note ahead of time. I received his packages regularly in daily letters that read like a diary, as if we hadn't split. A co-worker, after receiving coffee sent by Steve, jokingly asked, "Your husband on a long business trip or something?" I didn't have an answer. Steve and we were like a long-distance couple now. He was showing me he wasn't okay with breaking up. But how long could this last without a response from me? Looking back, Steve and I got together naturally, just at the right time. He never chased or sweet-talked me. Now, he's making up for it. I'd be lying if I said it didn't get to me, but mostly, I felt confused. I hadn't seen Jessica in nearly a month. It was like she vanished. Some said she resigned, others that she was sick. Talk went around. People even asked me if I knew where she was, assuming we were close. Were we really that tight? Would a best friend really scheme and set me up like a third wheel? Jessica called one late night. I was asleep. She was crying, saying nothing at first. I was startled awake, unsure. Jessica? She choked out, "What kind of spell did you cast on him?" I asked, but Jessica hung up after a few rushed words. In a daze, I unblocked Steve's number and called him. It was late, and I expected him to be asleep, but he answered almost instantly. His voice was clear. "Maria?" I took a deep breath. "What happened with Jessica? Did she reach out to you?" "Yes." I heard the flick of a lighter on his end. "I met with her parents." I was taken aback. Jessica had told me how controlling her parents were. Maybe they'd loosened up a bit over time, but whenever she got calls from them, she'd get noticeably tense. "What did you say?" "Not much." Steve paused. "I just asked her to leave you alone. You know she hasn't come to work for a month?" "Really?" His tone was nonchalant, like he'd expected it. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to end the call. Steve's voice stopped me. "Maria, I'm not generous." I got what he meant. Jessica led us to where we were now, and he wasn't just going to shrug it off. Clutching my phone, I said, "I think Jessica's not mentally stable." "Yeah. You knew?" "Senior year internship, the company arranged a trip. Riley and I shared a room. 2 other girls joined us after work to hang out. When Jessica found out, she lost it on the phone, breaking things and threatening to find other guys to stay with if I didn't kick them out. 4 of us were there, including Riley. Would you call that normal?" It was the first time Steve talked about Jessica's past like that. His voice seemed distant. "Maria, once a fragile relationship is let go, it's not worth holding on." The next day at the office, a colleague nudged me. "Jessica's back." Startled, I asked, "Where?" "Boss's office." She whispered, "I think her parents are here." I looked over just as Jessica stepped out of the office. We froze. She looked worn, with no makeup and dark circles. A middle-aged couple, likely her parents, also emerged, briefly glancing at me. Jessica said something to them. They exchanged frowned words and left. Her mom gave me a quick once-over as they passed. I frowned uncomfortably, and Jessica came over. "Maria, can we talk?" In the stairwell, Jessica asked, feeling proud, "Are we?" I chose not to bite. "You quit?" She chuckled. "What place would keep me after a month's absence? Didn't you notice they replaced me?" I began seeing her differently. Her tone was new, resigned. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked. "You're acting like it doesn't matter." "Should I be crying?" "True." She laughed bitterly. "I've always known you were his girlfriend. Why I even got close to you, I can't say. Maybe just to see who he chose. Maria, we're nothing alike. And that's why I despise you." Jessica and I worked together for about 6 months, until she met Steve at my birthday party a couple of months ago. That's when she finally shared the story of her first love. She said it was impulsive, but I think she'd been planning to tell me for a while. It was just a matter of time. "So, you've achieved your goal," I said. "What goal?" she replied. I gave her a look, surprised by her cluelessness. "If you reached your goal, why wouldn't he come to you instead of staying by my side?" Faced with her nerve, I found myself speechless. "Steve is probably the last person who would want to see my parents, but he was willing to meet them because of you. He's really determined. You know what scares me, but I gotta ask, what's so special about you that he'd do that? Why didn't he ever try to hold on to me like he did with you?" She was almost talking to herself. I was already exhausted listening. "It's because you only remember how he hurt you that one time." Steve surely tried to keep things together with her. She pushed him away repeatedly, and he always tried to calm things down. Disappointment piled up. She assumed it'd always be that way, so his leaving was a shock. "What do you know?" she suddenly shouted, her voice echoing through the stairwell. Have you ever waited outside his house for over 2 hours, only to find out he's with his girlfriend? You guys had broken up by then. I honestly don't know which day you're talking about, but I know that when Steve and I started dating, you two had been broken up for a year. And you were the one who told me that. Steve spending time with me made sense. He didn't stand her up since they didn't agree to meet in the first place. How did she twist that into some kind of betrayal? Considering her agitated state, I held back from telling her to quit playing those self-pitying games, where you end up upset just because the other person didn't react the way you wanted. It's pathetic. Don't you get it? You're his second choice, he's just using you to get back at me. I have to admit, after a month of her incessant persuasion, that remark hit hard. I looked at her coolly. Then why are you taking it out on me? Jessica glared at me, falling silent. Then her phone rang. It was her parents, telling her to hurry up. She gave me one last look, filled with anger and pity. She brushed past me and left. I stood in the dark for a long time. After I composed myself and left, Jessica was gone. A few people in the office whispered among themselves, asking what I'd said to her. Not much. Then why did Jessica suddenly cry and tell her mom she didn't want to leave? Wait, what? She cried, my colleague insisted, raising a hand. Then her dad slapped her, asking if she could save him some face. While they were discussing the heavy-handed slap, I was in a daze, suddenly remembering what Jessica said to me as she left the stairwell. She said, maybe this is karma, you know, for how my parents treated him back then, and now he's returning it all. When Steve found out that Jessica had come back to the office, he called me a few times. I was too messed up to answer. Anyone who's been around someone as intense as Jessica needs time to process. Now, when I think of Jessica, I think of Steve and all their drama. Why dump it all on me? The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became. Ignoring Steve for a week wasn't entirely on purpose. I've been genuinely busy. There's a new hire taking over Jessica's tasks, and she's pretty green. I worked late a couple of nights and basically passed out as soon as I got home, didn't even check my phone. It was the same today, except after my shower, in the middle of blow drying my hair, the power went out. Management had warned us, but with everything going on, I'd totally forgotten. With damp hair, I fumbled in the dark for my phone. Before I could find it, there was a knock at the door. Maria, open up. It was Steve. I stood there for a moment, then went to open the door. Despite being at home, I managed to stumble and bang my knee. Steve stood at the door, his silhouette outlining the worry on his face. Power's out? How'd you know? Just passing by. Really? He rubbed his nose. I've been downstairs this whole time. Why? You've been pulling long hours. I was worried, needed to see you get home. But I've been back for an hour. Yet he was still there. Maybe he'd been waiting like this all week. My heart was a mess of feelings as I stepped aside. Come in. He looked at me, turning his phone's flashlight on. The whole building's out. Yeah. When's it coming back? In about an hour, maybe. Once inside, Steve found my phone. The only light in the room was coming from the phone on the table. I sat on the corner of the couch and, after a moment of quiet, I said, Jessica told me something when she left. After I shared it, I looked at him. Why call it karma? He clenched his hands, like he needed a cigarette. That winter break when I started dating Jessica, her parents invited me over for dinner. She later said they liked me. I believed her. But knowing her family was well off, I felt I needed to hustle even harder to give her the best. So, I rarely said no when she wanted something. He chuckled softly, continuing, in our senior year, I was swamped with work. Things with Jessica got rough. But I hung in there, thinking we'd just have to tough it out, enduring for the future we'd have. The story was like a punch to the gut. Slowly, I was piecing together the unsaid truths he didn't point out to me directly. His words, unkind as a blade, hurt more than Jessica's passive remarks. He really had cherished her back then. Maybe that's why he never spelled it out for me. Even though I know the backstory, I want to cry all the same. What did her parents say to you? Don't remember the exact words, mostly that I wasn't good enough for Jessica and we should split amicably. I wanted Jessica to hear me out personally, but she disappeared for a week. She clearly didn't want to see me. Maybe it was out of stubbornness, maybe she agreed with her parents. But what really crushed me was that they looked down on my family. And Jessica didn't even defend me, not one bit. She said she tried to get back together with you not long after, but you didn't agree. Yeah. It was that day I realized she's a lot like her parents. All high and mighty, stomping on a person's dignity. I was in my early 20s back then, too young, couldn't resist a challenge, swore I'd prove myself. A while ago, I met with her parents and threw their words right back at them. Honestly, it felt pretty satisfying. But once that satisfaction faded, I just felt empty and couldn't figure out why I did any of it. I awkwardly said, how could it be meaningless? Back then, it was my pride, young and bold, with big ambitions. Once I got out into the real world, I realized that stuff didn't really matter. If, in the beginning, I pushed myself to prove them wrong, then everything I did after, I did it for myself, for you, for us. I had my priorities backward. I took those meaningless taunts too seriously, worked day and night, and ignored your feelings. The couch was small, and Steve just leaned over and sat beside me. He took my hand. His tone was serious. Maria, I'm sorry. I looked at his face as he came closer. I didn't move back. I said, I'm not as decisive as you are, maybe I can't be so clear-headed. This has left a knot in my heart, and I don't think I can just move on from it. Does that not bother you? But he didn't let me continue. Give me a chance. He touched my face, his palm felt unusually warm. But I didn't know. Let's take it slow. And then he kissed me. That night, Steve didn't leave. I don't remember when the electricity came back on, the light in the living room stayed on all night, but the bedroom was dark, occasionally filled with whispers. I was in a haze, and I forgot what more he said. Probably sweet nothings. Lying back to back with him, I slept the best I had in days. Epilogue. Before I knew it, Christmas was around the corner. I still remember last New Year's Eve, Steve and I watched fireworks from a hotel room, enjoying a couple's package, complete with wine and desserts. We both weren't being very serious that day. Now our relationship isn't what it was, unclear and tangled. We're like a couple but can't go back to the sweetness of before. I've moved out, and he keeps showing up at my place, wanting to stay over, always pretending to be pitiful. Like a sex partner, yet he's way more invested than your average partner. He cares a lot, always checking in, even spending more time with me than before. He doesn't push the reconciliation question anymore. Instead, he just focuses on making up for things without asking for anything in return, as if he really doesn't care about labels. But I know he does. The other day, at a class reunion, I went alone. People assume I'm single, and when I couldn't explain, they started teasing me about an old class captain. Afterward, the captain gave me a ride home, and Steve saw us. He held it together then, but only just, as he followed me upstairs and made me hangover soup. I told him to leave, but he used the excuse of taking care of me to stay and ended up in bed with me, holding me tightly, whispering in a low voice like dreaming. Can you stop looking at others and just look at me? It's been 3 months since Jessica left, and that night was the first time he dropped the facade, confessing what he really wanted. I felt lost. I know he's anxious inside. Until I make up my mind, he can't ease his heart, but he's too scared to ask, worried my answer would be a no, caught in a loop. For a long while, I turned to look at him. He was already asleep. My apartment's not close to his work. Running back and forth all the time, not like he's made of steel, of course he's tired. On the last day of the year, nobody in the office was really focused, all planning for the evening's dinner. A colleague asked why I wasn't joining them. I instinctively checked my phone, and before I could reply, someone else answered, "Maria's got to be with her boyfriend, of course. You think she's like us?" I didn't confirm or deny it. That night, Steve's vulnerability was just a fleeting moment. By the next day, he regained his composure. I didn't know how long he could keep it up and didn't want to confront that yet. But until the end of the workday, I didn't hear from Steve at all. I went back to my apartment alone. Even though he hadn't moved in, his presence was everywhere. I picked up my phone again, as if by instinct, and it immediately lit up with Steve's call. I answered right away, asking where he was. His voice was hoarse, at the hospital. His mom was sick and hospitalized. I hung up and rushed to the hospital. I saw Steve in the hallway and asked him what had happened. He seemed surprised I came so quickly. "Don't worry, the surgery was successful, she's all right." It was a thyroid surgery, and only confirmed benign just a couple of days ago. I was a bit upset. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "She's my mom too." We both paused for a moment. It's been a while since I visited Steve's mom with him. I'm not sure if he told her about us, but Steve's mom didn't call me on his behalf, just sent little treats like pickles for him to give me sometimes. After a moment of silence, Steve held my hand. "Wanna see her? I bet she's missed you." I took a deep breath and entered the room. Seeing Steve's mom looking so worn out, my nose tingled with emotion. But her face lit up when she saw me, beckoning me over and asking why I looked thinner. I lowered my head, too guilty to meet her eyes. She just patted my head, giving me an out. "Busy lately? Even if you are, don't forget to eat, don't try to lose weight, it's not good for your health." Not once did she bring up Steve. I suddenly feared she knew about the ring. If she did, knowing her, she'd definitely blame herself. Once she fell asleep, I stepped out of the room, not seeing Steve, only to find from my phone he was downstairs. Downstairs, watching the moon. Spending New Year's Eve in a hospital, it's really quiet. He was sitting on a bench outside, head slightly raised, not moving an inch. Who knows what he was thinking? I sat beside him. After being with someone this long, words aren't needed. He could tell what I wanted to ask. He said, "Mom doesn't know about the ring." I breathed a sigh of relief. "What did you tell her?" "Just the truth. I said Jessica came back, and it's my fault for not handling things with her properly, which made you upset. The ring was just the trigger. Without it, things would have come out eventually. He never should have hidden it from the start." I was speechless. He added, "I also told her that I'm trying to win you back. She's naturally on my side, but she's worried you'll feel bad because of her, so she didn't contact you, Maria. Don't overthink it, she really cares about you." I sniffled and shook my head. Why would I overthink? I know Steve's mom had a rough past. I just feel bad that I haven't checked on her because I was mad at Steve and didn't even know she was sick. Then Steve put his arm around my shoulder. "Do you know when I first started liking you?" I got distracted and looked up. "When?" "Just a few days after we got back from the desert, that time I asked you out for a drive. That was our first date, just the two of us. We weren't officially a couple yet. By the lake, the tension made our hearts race, and we almost kissed." I remember his phone rang. "So, we didn't kiss." While I answered the call, you made a ring out of grass, looked at me, and smiled when you finished. When you're on a call, part of your mind zones out. Steve said my smile at that moment filled that blank space perfectly. If I hadn't smiled then, would you not have liked me? Then, I would have fallen for you the next second anyway. With that, he suddenly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a velvet box. My eyes widened. When he opened it, there was a diamond ring. I had it custom made. It took a long time, and I only got it last month. I'd been carrying it around, afraid you wouldn't want it, so I didn't give it to you. I looked at the ring, thinking back to everything that happened a few months ago. Time goes by so fast. I asked him, and now you dare to give it to me? If you like it, keep it. If not. He suddenly stopped. After a long silence, with his gaze on me, I picked up the ring. I rubbed it between my fingers, bent one, and slipped it on. The fit was perfect. I couldn't help but spread my hand and admire it, having to admit it suited me perfectly. But I didn't want to admit it just yet. So, I curled my lip in mock dissatisfaction and said, "It's not really about liking it or not. It's just all right." Steve looked at me for a long time and then smiled. He held my hand, and when I didn't pull away, he gave it a squeeze. The ring pressed into my palm, very present. "All right, next time I'll get you one you'll love at first sight. Expensive ones, too?" "Of course. What do I need so many rings for?" "Just things to switch out to wear. Because you can have lots of rings, but there's only one love."